Isabella Carrington adjusted the cuff of her designer coat as she stepped onto the balcony of her Manhattan penthouse. The city below gleamed like a sea of fractured jewels, lights reflecting off the Hudson, the streets alive with movement and indifferent to her presence. Tonight, though, the city's pulse felt different, heavier, almost watching. She tucked a folder under her arm and glanced back at the open living room. The piano's keys glinted faintly in the low light, a half-written melody left abandoned. A glass of wine caught the last glow from the chandelier, untouched. Isabella stepped into the foggy night, her heels clicking against the polished stone. Within minutes, she vanished, swallowed by mist and shadow. Inside, the penthouse betrayed no struggle, only hints of abrupt absence. Her laptop left open on a table, scattered jewelry catching faint reflections, and a single envelope lying face down near the door. Its seal was unfamiliar, an ornate emblem that spoke of calculated intent. Whoever orchestrated this disappearance had left a trace, just enough to taunt anyone who might search. By 11:52 p.m., Isabella was gone. Security cameras showed only blurred movements, and the building staff, unaware of the precise timing, reported nothing unusual. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious. But the first signs of the mystery had already begun to stir. The elevator pinged behind her, though no one had called it. A subtle metallic slide sounded near the doorway. A second envelope appeared, its wax emblem glinting ominously under the light. The game had already begun. Detective Mara Hughes arrived at Isabella's penthouse just as the first media crews were arriving. Flashing cameras, murmured speculation, and live streams surrounded the building. Inside, the apartment was meticulously preserved in disarray. The envelope remained on the marble floor, the corkboard above the desk now revealing Isabella's meticulously catalogued schedule, pins connecting meetings, events, and private appointments. Among the earliest clues were the GPS logs from Isabella's car. One anomaly stood out, a series of cab rides matching unusual hours and obscure drop-off points. The name that surfaced first was Daniel Vance, an ex-con cab driver with a reputation for erratic behavior. He was reckless, easily visible to the police, and yet coincidentally aligned with the last recorded GPS point before Isabella vanished. Could he really be this precise? Vega muttered, scanning Daniel's criminal history. Past misdemeanors, late-night disappearances, and minor assaults painted a portrait of unpredictability, but nothing that suggested the level of planning Isabella's disappearance required. Still, appearances could be deceiving. Outside, media speculation escalated. Headlines flashed across social feeds: taxi driver linked to billion-dollar heiress, ex-con under scrutiny in Manhattan mystery. Could Isabella's vanishing be a criminal's masterstroke? The city was alive with guesswork, every citizen an armchair detective. Detective Hughes leaned over the corkboard. The GPS anomalies were deliberate, almost as if someone wanted the investigation to chase the wrong person. She whispered to Vega, "This isn't random. Someone is controlling the narrative, and Daniel might just be the perfect distraction." Just as the team prepared to close the Daniel Vance lead, an alert pinged across Mara Hughes' tablet. Isabella's last known coordinates now pointed toward a private estate north of the city, an area previously unlisted in any known plans. Someone was leading them deeper into the labyrinth, and the real game had only begun. Sebastian Locke was a man of quiet menace. Reclining in a sparsely furnished loft on the outskirts of the city, he meticulously documented routines, habits, and social circles. His past was checkered: minor involvement in criminal conspiracies, obsessive behavior toward high-profile individuals, and a reputation for psychological manipulation. To anyone outside, he seemed almost innocuous. But to Detective Mara Hughes, every detail hinted at someone who could orchestrate a disappearance like Isabella's. The task force followed breadcrumbs, a series of encrypted messages intercepted from a burner phone, anonymous tips pointing toward Sebastian, and neighbors who swore they'd seen him loitering near Isabella's favorite restaurants. Social media speculation compounded, creating a perfect storm. Locke, the hidden hand behind Isabella's vanishing? The city was already divided, with factions convinced of Daniel Vance's guilt and others painting Sebastian as the puppet master. Inside the loft, Sebastian's walls were a collage of photographs, maps, and scribbled calculations, an obsessive attempt to predict human behavior. Yet, nothing tied him directly to Isabella. It was all circumstantial. Still, the task force had to pursue every lead. Detective Vega traced the GPS anomalies and noticed subtle irregularities. Certain routes that had been attributed to Sebastian were impossible for him to have taken. Mara Hughes whispered, "This is deliberate misdirection, and someone is building a system to make us doubt every step." As the team prepared to intensify surveillance on Sebastian, a new anomaly appeared, a GPS ping placing Isabella near an isolated private estate, yet none of the local roads aligned with any known routes. It was a path the investigators hadn't seen before, a breadcrumb leading into a labyrinth carefully constructed by an unseen hand. Ethan Caldwell was the last person anyone suspected. Trusted family advisor, the quiet architect behind Isabella Carrington's vast empire, his demeanor was calm, almost paternal. He moved through Isabella's world like a ghost, unseen, yet intimately familiar with every corner of her life. To outsiders, he was dependable, meticulous, the kind of person you'd never question. But Detective Mara Hughes had a growing suspicion. The anomalies in Isabella's disappearance were too precise, too orchestrated, to be the work of any impulsive criminal. Inside his office, a large map dominated the wall. GPS coordinates, delivery logs, surveillance camera patterns, all interconnected by fine red threads that traced Isabella's routines like a spider's web. Each thread led to false suspects: Daniel Vance, Sebastian Locke. Ethan's system was flawless. He had created a reality where investigators, media, and even Isabella's own circle would be trapped chasing shadows. Meanwhile, the media frenzy intensified. Social feeds erupted with speculation. Could the heiress have staged her own disappearance? Daniel or Locke? Who really took Isabella? Is the family advisor the mastermind? The public consumed every fragment of information, unknowingly following Ethan's carefully planted breadcrumbs. Detective Hughes gathered the task force around the board. Vega traced a route from Isabella's last known GPS coordinate to the private estate north of the city. "It's too neat," he said. "Every lead, every clue, it feels like someone wants us to think we're close when we're nowhere near the truth." Just as Mara Hughes realized the depth of Ethan's deception, a notification appeared on her tablet. Isabella's last ping was now coming from an isolated private island, far off any known route, a location no one could have predicted, and a trap meticulously prepared for anyone following her trail. The private island appeared on satellite imagery like a sliver of green in an endless blue. Dense forests, jagged cliffs, and a single dock barely visible from above, it was isolated enough that no casual visitor could stumble across it. Detective Mara Hughes studied the coordinates, her pulse quickening. "This is it," she said, though none of them knew what awaited. The task force prepared for departure, helicopters overhead, boats ready at the mainland dock. Media coverage had exploded, leaking speculation. Heiress Carrington trapped on private island? Is this the end of the trail? Task force faces deadly unknown. Social feeds lit up with photos of luxury yachts and aerial shots of secluded estates, everyone guessing, no one knowing the truth. As the team boarded the transport, tension simmered. Agent Rachel Finch adjusted her gear, scanning the fog over the water. Detective Leo Vega checked his GPS devices, noticing small discrepancies, signals that suggested someone had been manipulating coordinates all along. Harris, silent for most of the journey, finally muttered, "This isn't just an island. It's a labyrinth. And someone's watching every step." The island grew larger with each passing minute, cliffs rising like sentinels, trees twisting in unnatural patterns. The water lapped quietly, masking the adrenaline of the approaching team. Every wave, every gust of wind, seemed to whisper that the task force was walking into a puzzle far larger than any single disappearance. Just as they neared the dock, radar signals spiked, a disturbance in the GPS readings. Vega frowned. "Something's here. Something bigger than we imagined. And it's been waiting for us." The boat scraped against the dock, mist curling like smoke over dark water. Detective Mara Hughes stepped onto the weathered planks first, her boots echoing in the silent air. The island loomed around them, shadows twisting beneath the dense canopy. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a branch seemed amplified, as if the forest itself were aware of their presence. The team split immediately into two units. Mara led the forward reconnaissance team, Vega and Finch covering the flanks, while Harris and the technical unit set up communication and surveillance along the shoreline. The air was thick, carrying an earthy scent and a subtle undertone of something metallic, a warning, perhaps, or the residue of meticulous planning. Even as they advanced, anomalies appeared. GPS signals fluctuated, footsteps didn't echo as expected, and occasional glimpses of lights between trees hinted at traps or observers. "It's like the island itself is designed to disorient us," Vega muttered, scanning the forest floor with his night vision. Meanwhile, the media had picked up satellite images of the team's approach. Social feeds exploded. "Task force enters Mystery Island. Is Isabella being held in a fortress of shadows? Will the heiress be found alive?" The public was obsessed, yet clueless. Every angle of the search seemed predetermined, orchestrated to keep both investigators and viewers on edge. The two units moved cautiously, but the island's labyrinthine design forced separation. Twisting paths, sudden drops, and unseen obstacles slowed them down, each step layered with tension and uncertainty. As Mara's team advanced deeper, Vega radioed a warning: "Something's moving in the trees." not human. Or maybe, someone waiting for us. The forest seemed to breathe around them, every step feeling like a descent into the unknown. The forest thickened, shadows lengthening like fingers reaching for the task force. Every step seemed to echo unnaturally, and the team began noticing inconsistencies, footprints that vanished, tree branches bent in impossible angles, and faint glimmers of light flickering just beyond perception. Detective Mara Hughes signaled the team to halt. "Keep your eyes open. Something here isn't natural," she warned. Vega scanned the surrounding trees, his GPS device flickering erratically. Finch whispered under her breath, "It's like the island itself is alive, guiding us, or taunting us." As they moved deeper, subtle traps began to surface, camouflaged pits, rigged tripwires, and faintly audible clicks from hidden mechanisms. The tension forced them into close proximity, yet suspicion simmered. Harris noticed footprints that didn't match any team member. "We're not alone," he said, eyes narrowing. "And I don't think it's Isabella." Meanwhile, the media coverage reached a fever pitch. Live streams captured every drone image and satellite snapshot. Headlines screamed, "Task Force trapped in Mystery Island, Heiress search turns into psychological maze, are they walking into a trap?" The public devoured every hint, unknowingly following the orchestrator's plan. Every step forward heightened the team's mistrust. Small mistakes were magnified, a dropped flashlight, a misread signal, a radio miscommunication. The island's design seemed intent on breaking them down, physically and mentally, while the task force struggled to maintain cohesion. As they rounded a bend, Vega froze. There, footprints again, leading in a circle. The team realized with a cold certainty, someone, or something, was keeping them contained, forcing them to confront their own doubts before they could reach Isabella. The forest seemed to pulse around them, a living labyrinth twisting with every step. As the task force pressed forward, subtle hallucinations began to unsettle the team. Vega swore he saw a shadow dart between the trees, only to vanish when Finch swung her flashlight. Harris swore he heard footsteps echoing theirs, yet radio checks confirmed no one had moved. Detective Mara Hughes tried to keep the team focused, her voice firm but tight with tension. "Stick to the path, check your instruments. This is psychological warfare, it's designed to break us." But even she could not shake the creeping unease that wrapped around their senses, like fog clinging to skin. Subtle traps forced errors. A false trail of broken branches sent Daniel Vance, still technically under investigation as a red herring, further into suspicion. "He could be here," Harris muttered, scanning the foliage. "Or someone's making it look like he is." The team realized Ethan Caldwell's orchestration ran deeper than anyone imagined, turning the terrain into a psychological minefield. Meanwhile, satellite feeds and drones captured glimpses of the team, feeding the public's fascination. Social media exploded, task force losing their minds on Mystery Island, are psychological traps driving them to madness, Heiress's fate tied to mind games? The orchestrator's plan unfolded in real time, turning investigation into theater. Every misstep, every whispered doubt, amplified mistrust. The task force began questioning each other, every glance, every hesitation, every dropped flashlight was suspicious. The labyrinth wasn't just physical, it was a system designed to fragment their cohesion, testing loyalty and resolve before they could reach Isabella. As they rounded another bend, Harris froze, pointing ahead. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, indistinct, partially obscured by fog. The GPS devices spiked again. The realization hit the team, someone was manipulating every step they took, and every move brought them deeper into Ethan Caldwell's carefully constructed trap. The forest began to thin, revealing jagged cliffs and twisted undergrowth. Every step forward felt like treading deeper into a living trap. Detective Mara Hughes led the forward unit, scanning the terrain while Vega and Finch covered the flanks. Harris lagged slightly, obsessively checking GPS readings that flickered unpredictably. Subtle hallucinations persisted. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the forest floor, distorted shapes mimicked human silhouettes, and every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps closing in. "This place is bending our senses," Finch whispered, gripping her flashlight. The tension was palpable, even seasoned investigators felt the psychological weight pressing down. Traps appeared with growing sophistication, camouflaged pits, false signals, and tripwires designed to mislead. Each discovery heightened suspicion within the team. Harris accused Vega of moving ahead without reporting. Vega shot back, pointing at misleading tracks that could have been planted by anyone. Trust frayed under the strain of exhaustion and fear. Outside, drones continued to capture the task force's approach, feeding a captivated public. Social feeds erupted, task force stuck in psychological maze? Are they being manipulated by an unknown mastermind? Heiress search turns into mind game. The orchestrator, Ethan Caldwell, had turned the operation into both a trap and a spectacle. Every misstep amplified the team's mistrust. They circled the clearing repeatedly, as if the island itself was guiding them into patterns of paranoia. The red herrings, Daniel Vance and Sebastian Locke, still loomed in their thoughts, complicating every decision. As they reached the edge of a clearing, Harris froze. Ahead, a structure appeared, partially hidden, man-made yet blending with natural terrain. The GPS devices went haywire, signaling the threshold of the inner lair. Mara's gut tightened. Whatever awaited them inside was no longer a hunt, it was a test, and Isabella's fate hung in the balance. The structure loomed ahead, a half-buried stone edifice, its entrance masked by vines and shadow. Mara Hughes motioned for silence, signaling the team to advance cautiously. Vega and Finch scanned the perimeter while Harris set up portable sensors. Every step forward was deliberate, every movement measured against the possibility of traps or ambush. The team split immediately upon entry. Mara led the forward unit down a narrow stone corridor, Vega and Finch taking side passages to map potential threats and communications interference. The air inside was thick, humid, and smelled faintly of damp earth. Strange carvings adorned the walls, symbols that seemed to shift when glanced at from different angles, creating the first whispers of unease. Subtle psychological challenges began to manifest almost immediately. Sounds echoed oddly, footsteps appeared in places where no one had walked. Shadows moved in ways the mind could not rationalize. Harris radioed a warning. Sensors are detecting movement, but there's no one here. Outside, media speculation continued to escalate. Drone images leaked of the team entering the structure. Task Force enters Heiress Lair. Is the mystery island an elaborate trap? Public obsessed as search turns psychological. The orchestrator's plan remained unseen, yet fully effective, manipulating perception while keeping the real threat hidden. As they advanced, the maze-like interior forced mistrust to peak. Minor errors, a misplaced flashlight, a misread symbol, a delayed radio response, were magnified, testing their cohesion. The labyrinth was both physical and psychological, designed to strain endurance and sanity. At the corridor's end, a faint light pulsed from a hidden chamber. The GPS spiked again. Vega whispered, "This is it. The core, whatever's controlling everything, is here." Mara's hand tightened on her flashlight. The task force was about to confront the heart of Ethan Caldwell's shadow system, and the test of their trust, endurance, and perception was only beginning. The pulsing light led the task force into a vast chamber, its walls carved with strange symbols and reliefs that seemed to shift under their gaze. Each team member felt the weight of unseen eyes, though no one was visible. The labyrinth had become more than a physical maze, it had become a psychological gauntlet. Mara Hughes led cautiously, every step measured. Vega scanned for traps while Finch documented the symbols, trying to make sense of the repeating patterns. Harris's handheld sensors flickered sporadically, registering movements that didn't exist. The labyrinth was testing their perception, patience, and trust in one another. At the same time, Isabella Carrington's perspective entered the narrative. She had been held in a separate hidden chamber, her surroundings stark yet engineered for control. She had studied the structure, memorized the routines, and tested every weakness she could find. Every shadow, every sound, every flicker of light became part of a plan, her plan. Inside the labyrinth, the task force's mistrust escalated. Small errors were magnified. Vega suspected Harris of misplacing sensors. Finch questioned Mara's judgment on the path forward. Yet even as their cohesion frayed, Isabella observed, mentally preparing for a daring move that could turn the tide. Media coverage continued externally, feeding the drama to a captivated audience. Task Force faces psychological trials. Isabella Carrington's fate unknown as Labyrinth reveals its traps, public obsessed with every step. Every frame, every leak, every speculation amplified the tension, mirroring the real-time unraveling inside the island. Isabella quietly prepared to exploit a weakness she had identified in the labyrinth. Her pulse quickened. One wrong move by the task force, one misread signal, and the orchestrator's trap could claim them all, or, if timed perfectly, it could provide her first opportunity to escape. Isabella's breath came in controlled, silent bursts. From her hidden vantage point, she observed the task force's advance through the inner chambers. Every footstep, every whispered disagreement, every minor mistake was a signal, the labyrinth's design amplifying their tension, their mistrust. She had memorized the patterns of movement, the sequences of light and shadow, and the subtle vibrations of the floorboards. Now, it was time to act. Isabella slipped quietly from her hiding place, moving with practiced precision. Each step was calculated, avoiding the pressure plates and misdirection triggers embedded in the labyrinth's floor. Meanwhile, the task force pressed on, unaware of her movements. Vega tripped over a cleverly camouflaged pit, Finch nearly misread a shifting symbol on the wall, and Heiress accused Mara of leading them into a false path. The psychological trials continued, and the team's cohesion frayed further with every passing second. The media's fascination mirrored the chaos inside the labyrinth. Live feeds of the outer perimeter showed helicopters circling, drones capturing images of shadows moving through mist. Heiress Carrington may be inside, task force fracturing under psychological pressure. Is this the orchestrator's ultimate trap? Isabella reached a narrow corridor that led to a secondary chamber. Here, her first real test awaited, a series of mechanical locks and observation windows. Using her knowledge of the labyrinth's design, she bypassed each obstacle, leaving subtle clues that the task force would see too late, red herrings designed to misdirect them from her path. Just as Isabella neared the secondary chamber's exit, a subtle sound made her freeze, the faint echo of Mara Hugh's voice calling over a radio. The team was closer than she realized. One misstep now could reveal her presence, or worse, trigger the next layer of Ethan Caldwell's trap. Isabella pressed forward, moving through narrow corridors carved with strange symbols. Each step brought her closer to the labyrinth's inner sanctum. Her mind ran through every calculation she had made since her capture, the timing of the task force, the placement of traps, and the behavior patterns of those pursuing her. Meanwhile, the task force stumbled deeper into the labyrinth's maze. Shadows stretched unnaturally, walls seemed to shift, and faint whispers echoed where no one spoke. Vega's voice broke through the tension. Did anyone else see that? Something moved there. Finch responded with a shaky laugh, unsure if she was masking fear or disbelief. Even Mara, the anchor of the team, felt the ground shift beneath her certainty. Subtle traps continued to manipulate perception. Pressure plates triggered hidden lights, creating illusions of movement, and reflective surfaces warped shadows into threatening shapes. Each hallucination forced suspicion to flare between team members. Heiress accused Vega of setting a trap. Vega countered, claiming Heiress had misread the map. Trust eroded further, leaving the group vulnerable to misdirection. Isabella reached the inner chamber's antechamber, a room where the air was heavy and metallic, and faint vibrations hinted at mechanisms lying beneath the floor. Here, she planted her own subtle diversions, displaced objects, slightly misaligned symbols, and faint scratches, enough to send the task force off course without revealing her position. Outside, the media remained ravenous. Drone feeds captured glimpses of shadows moving through misted corridors, Heiress inside labyrinth, task force struggling against psychological maze, audience watches as tension peaks. Ethan Caldwell's orchestration was complete, unseen yet omnipresent. As Isabella approached the central chamber, she felt a shift, subtle vibrations beneath her feet, almost like a heartbeat. The labyrinth seemed aware of her movement, anticipating her next step. Every second became a test of precision, nerve, and timing. One wrong move now could collapse the fragile advantage she had fought so carefully to maintain. The faint pulsing light ahead marked the boundary of the labyrinth's inner sanctum. Mara Hughes signaled the team to pause, scanning every shadow, every shifting reflection along the walls. The corridor widened into a massive chamber, its walls covered with intricate carvings and faintly glowing symbols that seemed almost alive. Vega and Finch fanned out, checking for traps. Heiress adjusted his sensors, trying to stabilize the erratic readings. The labyrinth's manipulations intensified, walls appeared closer or farther than they were, corridors twisted subtly, and auditory illusions made footsteps seem to come from impossible directions. Meanwhile, Isabella had reached the chamber's antechamber. She crouched, observing the team through a narrow slit in the wall. Each movement they made, each misstep, was part of a pattern she had studied. Her pulse raced. The labyrinth's design had always accounted for human error, but she had planned for it too. The task force stepped into the sanctum, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. Symbols on the walls flickered in response, some lighting in sequence with their movements. Mara whispered, "It's like the room is watching us." Suspicion flared. Vega turned sharply at a shadow he swore moved independently. Finch muttered under her breath, "It's testing us, psychologically, physically." Subtle distractions escalated. Faint mechanical clicks suggested hidden doors opening. Shadows warped unnaturally across the floor. Even Mara hesitated, questioning which pathways were real and which were illusions. The team was being stretched to the brink, the labyrinth system was flawless in amplifying doubt. Outside, the public watched in real time, their fascination mirrored by escalating social media speculation. Task force enters inner sanctum, Heiress still missing, psychological traps test investigators. Is this the end of the hunt? As the team moved deeper, the labyrinth responded. The floor shifted slightly beneath Heiress's feet, triggering a faint tremor. Vega froze mid-step, flashlight beam catching something impossible, a moving shadow with no source. Mara gripped her radio tight, with Isabella making a decisive move while the task force faces escalating physical and psychological challenges, building toward confrontation and cinematic suspense. Isabella crouched low in the shadowed antechamber, the pulse of the labyrinth vibrating faintly beneath her. Every sound, every echo of the task force's movement, fed her calculations. She had memorized their likely paths, their timing, and the errors that the labyrinth would provoke. Now was the moment to act. With careful precision, she slipped through a narrow side passage, avoiding the pressure plates and sensors embedded in the floor. Her movements were silent, deliberate, almost a dance in the shadows. The labyrinth's mechanical whispers and flickering lights seemed to respond to her, but she pressed forward, confident in her careful planning. Meanwhile, the task force advanced into the inner sanctum. Shadows flickered in impossible directions. Symbols along the walls glowed faintly, responding to movement and generating visual distortions that disoriented the team. Vega nearly tripped over a camouflaged pit while Finch misread a sequence of glowing patterns. Harris, frustrated and exhausted, snapped at Vega for misplacing the sensors. Trust frayed further, cohesion became fragile. The media frenzy outside intensified. Drone footage captured moving shadows inside the labyrinth, feeding speculation. Eris Carrington moves in labyrinth, task force struggles against psychological maze, public obsessed with every twist. Ethan Caldwell's orchestration remained invisible yet omnipresent, manipulating perception while Isabella advanced. Isabella reached a small chamber within the labyrinth, a space overlooked in her captor's design. She paused, assessing the layout. There was a narrow vent above, mechanical locks below, and enough shadows to conceal her movements. With a deep breath, she began the first phase of her escape, placing subtle misdirections behind her, displaced objects and faint scratches, to lead the task force away. As Isabella began her ascent, the labyrinth seemed to pulse in response. A faint tremor ran along the floor, and somewhere ahead, a shadow flickered in her peripheral vision. The task force was closer than she realized. One misstep now could trigger the labyrinth's next deadly test, or reveal her presence entirely. The inner sanctum pulsed with mechanical life. Every corridor the task force entered responded to their movement, floors tilted, walls narrowed, and hidden mechanisms released faint clicks that set nerves on edge. Mara Hughes signaled the team to advance slowly, but every step was amplified by the labyrinth's subtle manipulations. Vega tripped over a concealed trapdoor, catching himself just in time. Finch's flashlight flickered against the walls, reflecting off symbols that seemed to shift with their gaze. Harris's sensors spiked erratically, confirming movement where there was none. Trust within the team frayed further, each member questioning the other's judgment. Meanwhile, Isabella crept along her escape path. The narrow vent led to a small secondary chamber overlooked in the original layout. She paused to adjust a loose grate, knowing the slightest noise could alert the task force. Behind her, subtle red herrings, displaced objects, faint scratches, misaligned symbols, ensured the team would continue down false paths. The labyrinth seemed alive, reacting to both pursuers and escapee. Faint tremors underfoot and whispered mechanical hums suggested a system designed to anticipate every move. Mara whispered into her radio, "Stay sharp. This isn't just a maze, it's a test." Every corridor, every shadow. Outside, media feeds continued to erupt. Task force stumbles in inner sanctum. Eris may be outmaneuvering investigators. Psychological maze baffles experts. The world watched as tension escalated, unaware of the precision and danger inside. As Isabella reached a small hidden hatch, she paused, listening. Somewhere deeper, the faintest echo suggested the task force had detected her trail. Every second was a test. One false step could trigger a labyrinth trap, or bring them face to face with her. Isabella pressed the hidden hatch open and slipped into a narrow crawlspace that led toward the labyrinth's central chamber. Each movement was deliberate, silent, a calculated dance against the labyrinth's traps. Her mind raced through every scenario. One misstep could collapse a false floor, trigger an alarm, or expose her to the task force. Meanwhile, the task force struggled to maintain cohesion. Vega stumbled over a subtle tripwire, activating a sequence of mechanical lights that warped perception, making corridors appear longer, narrower, and twisted. Finch tried to realign the sensors, but Harris argued over the readings, suspicion flaring. The labyrinth continued its psychological assault, forcing every member to question both the environment and their teammates. Mara signaled the team to pause, sensing a pattern in the distortions. "It's guiding us," she whispered. "Every misstep, every hesitation, it wants us divided." Isabella reached a small ventilation shaft leading toward a chamber deep inside the heart of the labyrinth. She paused, listening to faint echoes of the task force moving above her. Her pulse quickened. With precise timing, she began her ascent, maneuvering through twists and hidden obstacles. Outside, the media frenzy intensified. Heiress Carrington moves inside Labyrinth. Task Force faces unseen psychological challenges. Public obsessed with every twist. The orchestrator's unseen hand manipulated perception, turning the hunt into a spectacle. As Isabella advanced, the task force continued down false paths created by the red herrings she had left, displaced objects, misaligned symbols, faint scratches. Every distraction amplified mistrust and delayed progress, pulling them unknowingly closer to the heart of the labyrinth and to Isabella herself. As Isabella neared the heart chamber, a faint vibration ran along the walls, a warning, or perhaps a sign that the task force was closing in. Every second counted. One wrong move now could either trap her forever or bring her face to face with the investigators she had carefully outmaneuvered. The corridors narrowed and twisted, leading the task force closer to the labyrinth's core. Each step was calculated, yet every path seemed to shift, walls bending subtly, shadows stretching unnaturally. Mara Hughes held the lead, signaling cautiously. Vega swept the flanks while Finch studied symbols along the walls, attempting to decode the labyrinth's patterns. Harris's sensors flickered violently, detecting movement where none existed. Tension surged. "This place, it's testing us," Harris muttered. Vega shot back, suspicion in his eyes. "No, it's testing you. Or maybe you're just seeing what you want to see." Trust fractured further, even the tightest coordination was unraveling under the labyrinth's psychological assault. Above, Isabella maneuvered through ventilation shafts and hidden passages. Every misstep she forced the task force into brought her closer to the core chamber. She left subtle diversions behind, faint scratches, displaced objects, misleading symbols, turning the team's progress into a series of false leads. The labyrinth's manipulations intensified. Mechanical clicks echoed from hidden panels. Walls flickered with shifting symbols. Shadows danced along corridors, creating illusions of movement. Every sensory input became unreliable, forcing the team to rely on instinct, and instinct alone was now a liability. Outside, the public remained fixated. Drones and satellite feeds captured glimpses of the labyrinth's outer edges and team movements. Task Force stalled in Labyrinth, Heiress still missing, psychological maze fractures investigators. The orchestrator's invisible hand guided every moment, amplifying tension and mistrust while keeping the final confrontation unseen. As the task force rounded a corner, a faint vibration ran beneath their feet, a low mechanical hum that resonated through the walls. Vega froze. Finch's flashlight flickered violently. Mara's grip tightened on her radio. Somewhere above and ahead, Isabella prepared for the moment when all paths would converge. The heart of the labyrinth awaited, and every decision, every hesitation, every misstep would shape the outcome. The corridors opened into a cavernous chamber at the heart of the labyrinth. Pulsing symbols glowed faintly along the walls, casting long, twisting shadows. Mara Hughes signaled the team to proceed slowly, but hesitation was dangerous. Every step seemed to trigger subtle mechanical responses. Panels shifted, floors creaked, and shadows danced in impossible directions. Vega scanned the walls, spotting subtle distortions that made the chamber feel both vast and impossibly confined. Finch documented each anomaly while Harris's sensors spiked uncontrollably. The labyrinth's manipulations were now overt, its system reacting to their every move. Above and ahead, Isabella had reached the final stretch of her escape route. She climbed through narrow shafts and hidden passages, preparing to leap into the central chamber. Every red herring she had left behind continued to misdirect the team, amplifying their mistrust and slowing progress. The labyrinth struck directly. A hidden mechanism released a low-frequency vibration that disoriented the task force, making each movement feel heavier, slower. Shadows twisted unnaturally along the walls, and faint whispers echoed through the chamber. The team's cohesion strained under the psychological assault. Media coverage outside reached a frenzy. Live feeds captured shadows and vague movements. Task Force faces final psychological trial. Heiress moves within heart of labyrinth. Public obsessed as confrontation looms. Ethan Caldwell's orchestration, invisible yet omnipresent, pushed both pursuers and prey toward the climax. As Isabella prepared for her leap into the central chamber, a mechanical vibration pulsed beneath the team's feet. The labyrinth system had sensed her proximity, and every second became critical. The final convergence was imminent, a test of trust, skill, and nerve that would decide who controlled the labyrinth's heart. Isabella's heart pounded as she positioned herself above the central chamber. Every breath, every calculated movement, was precise. The narrow vent led directly into the heart of the labyrinth, a chamber alive with mechanical and psychological traps. The pulse of the labyrinth beneath her feet was almost tangible, a rhythm she could feel in her bones. Below, the task force cautiously approached. Mara signaled for slow, deliberate movements. Shadows twisted unnaturally across walls, symbols pulsed in response to their motion, and faint whispers teased the edge of hearing. Heiress muttered, "It's like the place knows us." Vega scanned the chamber, noting that each corridor seemed to elongate or contract with their progress, disorienting and unnerving them further. Isabella descended carefully, placing subtle diversions, loose debris, faint scratches, misaligned symbols, to delay the team and maintain her advantage. Each misdirection increased suspicion among the task force members. Finch whispered, "We're being played, every move, every shadow." The labyrinth system responded. Panels shifted, lights flickered, and the floor vibrated beneath them. The task force's cohesion strained as mistrust peaked. Vega accused Heiress of triggering a false sensor. Heiress countered, claiming Vega misread the layout. Mara's voice cracked with tension as she tried to maintain control. Outside, the media frenzy reached a crescendo. Heiress moves into core of Labyrinth. Task force faces unseen psychological assault. Public obsessed with every moment. The unseen orchestrator manipulated perception while Isabella advanced, undetected yet in control of her trajectory. As Isabella landed in the core, the labyrinth pulsed, almost alive. The task force reached the chamber's threshold moments later. Every second became critical, one misstep, one delayed reaction, and the labyrinth could claim victory. Trust, strategy, and nerve were tested to their limits. The climactic convergence was about to begin. The labyrinth's heart throbbed with mechanical life. Isabella landed softly on the chamber floor, scanning every corner, every shadow. Symbols glowed and shifted across walls, casting undulating patterns that distorted perception. She moved with precision, every footstep calculated, every breath measured. The task force reached the core's entrance. Mara signaled for caution, but the labyrinth had already begun to manipulate their senses. Panels shifted, shadows lengthened, and faint whispers echoed from every direction. Vega misread a symbol on the wall, Heiress's sensors went haywire, and Finch nearly tripped over a subtle floor plate that had appeared in an impossible location. Suspicion flared instantly. Vega accused Heiress of misreading the sensor data. Heiress snapped back, pointing to Vega's errant steps. Mara struggled to regain control as cohesion began to fracture. The labyrinth's design forced errors, amplifying tension, and isolating the team within their own fears. Above, Isabella moved toward the central console, the mechanical and symbolic core of the labyrinth. She knew the next step was critical. One precise action could destabilize the system long enough to escape, but a single miscalculation could trigger the traps and expose her. The chamber pulsed violently, responding to her presence and the team's approach. Shadows writhed on the walls, floor panels tilted subtly, and faint mechanical clicks echoed in rhythm with the labyrinth's pulse. Isabella took a daring leap toward the central platform, narrowly avoiding a rising panel that could have crushed her. Outside, media feeds captured distant shadows and pulsing lights. Task force faces heart of labyrinth. Heiress Carrington moves toward core, public obsessed with every twist. Ethan Caldwell's orchestration remained unseen but fully effective, manipulating both perception and timing with invisible precision. Isabella's hand touched the central console. The labyrinth shuddered in response. The team's next steps were critical. The chamber seemed to react to every thought, every movement, every heartbeat. The final confrontation was imminent, and no one inside the core could afford error. Isabella's fingers traced the glowing symbols on the central console. Each movement sent subtle feedback through the labyrinth, pulses that rippled along the walls and floor. She had memorized the sequence from careful observation. One misstep could trigger an irreversible trap. Below, the task force advanced cautiously. Shadows warped around them, making corridors appear impossibly long or bent. Heiress stumbled, Vega misread a glowing symbol, and Finch's flashlight flickered, every sensory distortion heightening mistrust. Mara tried to maintain command, but the labyrinth's manipulations forced them to second-guess every decision. Isabella activated the first stage of the override. Panels shifted violently, faint mechanical hums grew louder. The labyrinth reacted as if alive, adjusting its obstacles in real time. Shadows twisted unnaturally, floor plates tilted, and subtle vibrations tested their balance. The team faltered under the psychological and physical pressure. Vega shouted at Heiress, accusing him of setting traps. Heiress countered with vehemence. Mara's voice cracked as she attempted to restore order. Each second stretched into an eternity. The labyrinth's influence amplified fear, doubt, and misperception. Isabella moved faster. She had seconds to complete the override before the labyrinth adapted. With a precise sequence of touches, she destabilized the system just enough to create a window. The chamber quaked. Symbols flickered erratically. The labyrinth's pulse accelerated, responding aggressively to her intrusion. Media feeds outside captured the chaos. Heiress Carrington engages core, task force battling psychological and mechanical traps, audience obsessed with final confrontation. Ethan Caldwell's orchestration remained invisible, yet every moment unfolded according to his design, or perhaps Isabella's careful counter-design. The chamber quaked violently. Isabella's override worked partially, a temporary destabilization. But the labyrinth struck back. Hidden mechanisms whirred, shadows stretched, and subtle floor shifts threatened the team. Every heartbeat was a gamble. The split-second decisions now would determine who controlled the labyrinth's heart, and who would survive. The labyrinth roared to life. Panels shifted violently, floors tilted, and shadows writhed like living entities. The pulse of the chamber accelerated, resonating through walls and ceiling. Every sensory input became unreliable, every sound echoed with distortion. The task force faltered under the psychological and physical pressure. Mara Hughes tried to rally them. "Focus. Don't let it manipulate us." But Vega and Harris argued, mistrust flaring into panic. Finch's flashlight flickered, casting unnerving shadows across the walls. Every misstep triggered mechanical feedback, the labyrinth feeding off their disorientation. Above and within the heart, Isabella made her move. She sprinted across the destabilized floor, leaping over shifting panels and avoiding sudden mechanical spikes. Her fingers found the final sequence on the central console, a combination that could partially neutralize the labyrinth and create a path for escape. The chamber trembled violently as the labyrinth reacted. Shadows twisted toward the task force, walls narrowed unpredictably, and faint whispers filled the air. The team's cohesion teetered on the edge of collapse. Every instinct screamed danger. Isabella's pulse pounded. She had seconds to complete the override. One wrong touch, one delayed step, and the labyrinth could strike with lethal precision. The red herrings she left behind had worked perfectly. The team remained disoriented, following false trails and misreading symbols, unaware that the true path was opening before her. Outside, media coverage reached a fever pitch. Heiress confronts Labyrinth's core, task force struggles with mechanical and psychological assault, public obsessed as climax approaches. Every second stretched into eternity. Isabella's fingers pressed the final sequence. The labyrinth shuddered violently, then paused, a momentary stillness before the final chaos. The task force teetered on collapse, shadows stretching and twisting around them. Isabella's fate, the labyrinth's response, and the team's survival hung on the brink, setting the stage for the climactic split-timeline finale. The labyrinth trembled as Isabella completed the override. Light flickered across the central chamber, shadows stretching and distorting unnaturally. For a heartbeat, everything seemed suspended, the pulse of the labyrinth, the task force's faltering steps, and Isabella's poised stance above the console. Then the system reacted. A surge of energy rippled through the floor, disorienting the task force. Panels shifted violently, corridors collapsed in miniature sections, isolating members from one another. Mistrust erupted into outright panic. Vega and Harris collided, nearly toppling into a rising pit. Finch screamed as a shifting floor plate tipped beneath her feet. Mara shouted, "Hold it together. Focus." Above, Isabella moved with desperate precision. She leapt from the console to an upper ventilation shaft that promised escape. Each movement had to be perfect. One miscalculation and she would be trapped inside the labyrinth forever. The labyrinth pulsed and shifted again, as if aware of her intentions. Shadows twisted into shapes that mimicked human forms, mechanical panels shifted unpredictably, and faint auditory illusions filled the chamber with false cues. And then, the timeline split. Timeline 1, Isabella's leap carried her into the ventilation shaft. The floor trembled beneath her, shadows stretching past her vision, but she pressed on. Every instinct and calculation guided her upward, toward the faint hint of daylight she glimpsed at the shaft's far end. Timeline 2, simultaneously, the task force faced a near collapse. Harris fell into a mechanical trap, Vega struggled to catch him, and Finch's flashlight revealed that part of the floor had shifted, separating Mara from the others. Every second brought imminent danger. The labyrinth struck with perfect timing, exploiting mistrust, hesitation, and fear. Outside, media feeds captured fragments, shadows moving unnaturally, flashes of pulsing symbols, and snippets of panic. Social media erupted with speculation. Heiress moves through labyrinth, task force faces near collapse, climactic moments unfold live. Isabella's fingers brushed the edge of the vent's exit, freedom within reach. Below, the task force teetered on the edge of disaster, every member isolated and vulnerable. The labyrinth's pulse synchronized with both, a living test of nerve, skill, and luck. In the end, the outcomes remained ambiguous. Who would escape, who would fall, and whether the labyrinth itself had the final say. Isabella crawled through the ventilation shaft, the faint hint of daylight ahead a fragile promise. Every vibration from the labyrinth below reverberated through the metal, reminding her that the threat was omnipresent. Shadows twisted unnaturally across walls, a final psychological test. She hesitated, calculating the distance to the exit, then lunged forward, gripping the edge of a grate. Her body strained, fingers numb, but she pulled herself into a small maintenance corridor. For a brief moment, relief washed over her. The labyrinth's pulse had slowed in this isolated space. Yet, the sense of being watched persisted. She pressed forward, aware that freedom might still be an illusion. Below, the task force struggled. Harris clung to the edge of a collapsing floor panel, Vega reaching desperately to stabilize him. Finch scrambled over shifting corridors to reach Mara, but the labyrinth's manipulations continued to isolate them. Panic mixed with mistrust, every movement risked triggering traps or exposing a teammate to danger. The labyrinth pulsed violently, as if aware of their combined hesitation. Shadows stretched across the walls, echoing fears and amplifying uncertainty. Communication faltered. Radios crackled with distorted feedback. Each member's focus was fractured, each second a battle of nerves. Above and below, the labyrinth system seemed sentient, responding to every heartbeat. Isabella's path to escape and the task force's fight for cohesion converged in psychic and physical tension. One miscalculation, a misstep, a failed leap, a delayed reaction, could determine survival or collapse. Outside, media coverage remained frantic. Split fates inside Labyrinth. Heiress inches toward possible freedom. Task force faces Labyrinth's deadly tests. Ethan Caldwell's orchestration remained invisible, manipulating perception, ensuring maximum suspense for every observer. Isabella reached the corridor's end, the exit just ahead, yet a faint mechanical hum suggested one final obstacle. Below, the task force clung to crumbling panels, shadows encroaching. The labyrinth's pulse synchronized with both timelines, a living entity determining their fates. And then, silence hung in the air, the outcome unresolved. The screen of reality seemed to hold its breath. Would Isabella escape? Would the task force survive? Or would the labyrinth have the final word? Isabella emerged into the faint light of the maintenance corridor, the labyrinth's pulse fading behind her. The air smelled of damp metal and dust. For a moment, she allowed herself a slow breath, every muscle tense from the climb and the leap that had brought her here. Yet freedom was uncertain. The corridor stretched into darkness ahead, and faint mechanical whispers suggested the labyrinth might still be alive, observing, ready to strike. Isabella pressed onward, each step cautious, aware that escape might be temporary, a fragile triumph in a system designed to deceive. Below, the task force staggered, battered by the labyrinth's manipulations. Shadows twisted over their exhausted forms, corridors narrowed, and panels groaned beneath their weight. Mistrust lingered, but Mara Hughes forced the team to regroup. Vega, Harris, and Finch exchanged glances, silent acknowledgement passing between them. The labyrinth had tested every instinct, every decision. Each member was scarred, mentally and physically. Their cohesion, once fractured, began to stabilize, but the memory of the system's control lingered, an invisible reminder of the danger that had nearly consumed them. Media coverage continued to record fragments, leaving viewers with tantalizing ambiguity. Headlines alternated between triumph and disaster. Heiress reaches core, fate uncertain, task force survives labyrinth. But at what cost? The public obsessed with every twist of the maze. Social media buzzed with speculation, fan theories, and lingering fear. Who had truly survived? Who controlled the labyrinth? The world's gaze could not decipher the system that had played out in silence. The labyrinth's pulse slowed to a whisper. Isabella moved forward, shadowed by uncertainty. The task force retreated, battered but alive, carrying the weight of an unresolved mystery. The final frames of the story lingered on shifting shadows, faint mechanical echoes, and the silent labyrinth, a system that had tested trust, perception, and resolve. The conclusion remained deliberately unresolved, Isabella's ultimate fate unknown, the task force's survival intact but scarred, and the labyrinth's secrets lingering, waiting for the next observer to step into its pulse.
We believe that every mystery holds a hidden truth waiting to be uncovered. Subscribing to The Shadow gives you exclusive access to gripping true crime stories and deep dives into the darkest secrets. Subscribe for more.